What is up, my fellow gamers? Welcome to the channel. I am the Lethal Shinobi, and today I want to start off by introducing Dick Hayne, the senior technical producer over at CounterPlay Games. Hello, Dick.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dick. Thanks for asking. Now tell me, are we going to get anything new in the Fire and Darkness DLC?
New challenges, new ways to interact with combat and bosses, and just new ways to think about those high stake encounters.
Sounds fantastic. So guys, let's get into it. So all joking aside, I wanted to get into a few key details that were outlined in the second part of the interview, in which Dick Hayne talks about the upcoming Fire and Darkness DLC. So let's start by listening to what he had to say in general about the release of this DLC.
We already kind of had a plan of what content was going to come after the base game, and of course we're reacting, we're manipulating that, we're molding it based on player feedback, but we had to be ready to go. The expansion was the first time that we really got to take a step back, see what GodFall was, see what was working for GodFall, and create something entirely new within that universe and off that amazing visceral melee combat foundation that we built. So digging into the Fire and Darkness expansion, I mean, this is the first time the players are going to be brought to the Fire realm. Fire is unlike anything in the base game. It really allowed us to take a moment and change the tone of GodFall a little bit. That was something we want the expansion to feel like kind of a completely new experience for the player, both in tone and theme, etc. So the Fire realm, it's much, I guess I would say, darker and almost feels more aggressive than any of the other realms.
The first point here I wanted to highlight, it's really great to see that even though they had a plan before going into this, once GodFall had been released, that they're reacting to the community's experience with GodFall and taking on that feedback to create something new. Now Mr. Hayne did outline that the Fire Realm experience is going to be something entirely new for us, which is something that I'm really looking forward to. And the fact that he mentions that the tone will change to a much darker and aggressive tone, I'm hoping this means that we get a bit more of a mature theme going forward, especially as there was some hope of an actual cinematic experience through the story. This is what Mr. Hayne had to say.
The Fire Realm in general served as an awesome backdrop for our cinematic department to really go to town. And I'm really proud of the storytelling that takes place across the variety of cinematics in the expansion. It was really inspiring to see those artists push themselves, again, taking what they learned from base Godfall, and I think players will be surprised by the tone that the expansion kicks off on right from the get-go.
So I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready to be surprised. Mr. Hayne, are we going to have to deal with any padding before we actually get into the core aspects of the DLC?
So we wanted the stakes to be high right from the get-go. The second that you boot up the expansion, there's no fluff, there's no easing you into it. We're going to throw you right into the action and get things rolling with a bang. There's obviously going to be a ton of new content that comes with the expansion, but it's really all this content that is complementary to the new story that we're telling in Fire and Darkness. The new enemies, this includes the Flameblood tribe. This is a brand new tribe of enemies that we're introducing to Godfall. These are the tribe of enemies that inhabits the Fire realm.
So guys, we're getting a brand new enemy type called the Fireblood. This is amazing to see because not only are they new enemies, they also have new mechanics to defeat them and are not limited to only ground attacking enemies. We actually got to have a look at the flying type enemies in the game. But the question here, guys, is it going to be more of the same, or is it actually going to be something new? Let's have a look at what Dick had to say.
And what was exciting about crafting the Flameblood is you know, you get presented an interesting design challenge where players are coming off of the Air Realm, they're coming off of the end of base Godfall, some endgame grinding, and the question is, how do we create a challenge in a campaign, you know, through these new enemies that is going to surpass the challenge of an end game loop, right? Because that's what the player just spent a lot of hours doing in theory, and now they're going to jump into the Fire Realm, and you don't want it to feel like it's like easy, it's getting easier on them or something. We want to continue raising the stakes and increasing the tension. So designing the Flameblood tribe and thinking about, you know, how like, what is this comparatively in difficulty to, say, the Nyax in the Air Realm. That was a really exciting challenge for our team, and I think the results, the output of that challenge is a tribe that is unlike any enemies in base Godfall. We introduced new mechanics, we introduced new systems, so you're not only engaging with enemies differently, but you're also thinking about your builds differently and how to tackle those challenges.
It's so beautiful to see. If you guys have ever had that fantasy of trying to knock your enemy out the sky with your great sword, your polearm, or even your shield, it's now going to be possible, guys. I'm also really happy to see him talking about having to think about our builds and us having to change them for this new enemy type. Because let's face it, guys, we've been playing Godfall for a while now, and we've all got set in our ways with our builds. I think this will add a new element to actually making the DLC feel new. But we talked about the normal enemies, what about the bosses? Mr. Hayne, can you share any additional details?
The bosses will be new aggressive. Designing it, similar to the Flameblood enemies, and talking about that tribe, bosses are kind of similar, where we were able to, again, reflect on what went really well for base game Godfall, look at what we wanted to do for the future. And what's cool about our boss design, right, is we have a pretty broad cast of new bosses that we're introducing. And what we wanted to do is, there's one enemy that I would say is pretty grounded in base Godfall. You'll experience it. You'll be like, this feels familiar, mechanically, visually. It's a bit grounded in where we started and what our roots were. But then going from there, once you get past that initial boss, that again is going to feel kind of familiar, but not be anything. It's still new, but familiar. And I could pretty confidently say that none of the bosses you experience in Fire Darkness, other than that one that I mentioned before, none of them are going to feel like what you experience on base game. New challenges, new ways to interact with combat and bosses, and just new ways to think about those high stake encounters.
So we're gonna get new but familiar, and then new stuff. Sounds fantastic to me, guys. I just wanted to add here, guys, it's on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. There are going to be 2 new trophy lists, which Mr. Hayne did mention in this interview. So Mr. Hayne, what if I'm feeling a bit disappointed about what I've heard so far? Have you got anything for me?
I can even do you one better then, and this will segue nicely. So what's really exciting about this update, you mentioned at the top here that we have a lot of new stuff coming. We talked about PS4, we're talking about the expansion, but those are actually only really 2 of the 3 components, 2 of 4 if you really wanted to kind of milk it a little bit. But alongside the expansion, we also have a free Lightbringer update coming.
That's actually a really good point. Guys, if you haven't seen my video on the Lightbringer update with the new cursed loot items coming to the game, you can check it out here. Dick, are there any additional details you'd like to share on the Lightbringer game modes?
Yeah, so the free Lightbringer update is a really exciting one to do here. We alluded to it in the last video. The big piece of content that we're dropping is a brand new endgame loot, which we're calling the Lightbringer game mode. And without getting into too much, I don't want to create any spoilers. There is some nice narrative tie-in for this new game mode, so I won't go too in depth. But it's essentially, if you want to think about Dreamstones and an Ascended Tower of Trials, we've talked about this being almost like a roguelite experience within Godfall, or at least that was kind of the inspiration for those game modes. But then, so if that's kind of what those 2 game modes were, we wanted to do something very different with Lightbringer, and I'd say this feels more like a survival. Or pulls inspiration perhaps from the survival genre, because there's this idea that there's a darkness that is threatening the elemental realm, and that you essentially have to drive that darkness out of it. So what's going to happen in Lightbringer essentially is players are going to be brought back to the elemental realms that they think they're familiar with, but it's going to be completely different, because the Heart of Darkness, this thing that we have created, has taken over the realm and cast it in shadows and darkness, and it's essentially the player's job to fight off that darkness by accumulating light, by activating light resources across the realm, and essentially defeating the Heart of Darkness with that light. So it's much more, you're pressed for time, you're constantly trying to gather resources, survive, and then ultimately defeat the final encounter against the Heart of Darkness. I'm
really happy to hear you calling this a new game mode, because I feel like I'm definitely up for a challenge of something new. Is there something that makes this new game mode unique?
Yeah, of course. So similar to Ascended Tower of Trials, where during the Primal update we attached Primal loot drops specifically to Ascended Tower of Trials. You can only get that loot by participating in that game loop. Lightbringer will have its own type of loot associated with it, and this is brand new. And again, because it's part of the Lightbringer update, this is free for everyone. We're introducing a brand new loot type along with new loot and new gear included, called Cursed Loot. Cursed loot can only be gained in the Lightbringer mode, and cursed gear is essentially absurdly powerful loot that is locked behind curses, and it will be up to the player to lift those curses. And in order to lift curses, there are particular objectives you must complete. Right. So just a quick example might be defeat a level 60 Dreamstone, and when you do that, it will lift one of several curses off of the item. And once you've lifted all the curses off, it then becomes an awakened. It transitions to being an awakened piece of loot, and that's when it becomes this all-powerful mega piece of gear. But the challenge of awakening it, right, is while it's a cursed loot, you have to have it equipped to lift those curses, but while it's cursed, it's going to have certain inhibitors that make it weaker. So the player is being challenged on 2 different fronts in order to nurture their loot to become the all-powerful awakened item.
The new loot chase sounds amazing. I'm really eager to get my hands in it on the 10th of August. Dick, before the interview concludes, would you like to finish off with any details? Maybe something about the cosmetic items?
So, you know, staying in line with this idea of constantly challenging the player and creating, I like how you say it, Blessing, creating a relationship between the player and their loot. We wanted to double down on that, and cosmetics were an obvious route for us to go. We love how our 12 Valor plates turned out, how unique they feel. We got a lot of positive reception on launch, just how great the Valor plates looked, and we just wanted to give more of that. So yeah, we're excited to announce that with the Lightbringer update, we are introducing unlockable cosmetics, which previously didn't exist in the game. There were a handful of cosmetics that players could have gotten from, you know, the Ascended, Deluxe Edition, so on and so forth, pre-order bonuses. But beyond that's kind of where cosmetics stopped for base Godfall. Now with the Lightbringer update, there's going to be a gigantic library of cosmetics, all of which can be unlocked by completing objectives in-game. In the Lightbringer update specifically, I believe we have 45 unique cosmetics. And again, Lightbringer update being free for everybody. This is anybody who has the base game. Once you download that update, if you get it on the PS4, those 45 cosmetics are there and ready to be unlocked. And then in the expansion itself, there are an additional 40 cosmetics, again, gated behind objectives that the player must complete. And they, you know, and in some ways they kind of become trophies, right? Showing off that you were able to complete that objective. Some of them easier than others. There's a rarity hierarchy among the cosmetics, right? So there are some easy gimmies that you could probably get within the first few hours of play, and then of course you have your chase items that will require perhaps a much larger investment. It's been a thrill just getting up until this point, and you know, I will call out, I feel as though we owe the community an updated roadmap now in light of this, because our last roadmap that we put out ended Q2 2021. This has all been the primal update. All of our improvements to the game have been leading up to this, and now the question that we again get to ask ourselves, and I'm thrilled to, is what comes next. And to some degree, that's what now we get to wait and see.
Dick, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for yours. It was a pleasure being here.
All right, guys, so there we have it. We're going to get new bosses, new enemies, new items, new realm. This DLC and the free Lightbringer update is looking to be extremely promising. We'll have to test it out and see after the 10th of August how it actually comes down. I want to thank you all for joining me here today. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, guys. It's been a pleasure. I wish you all a blessed day, and I will catch you in the next one.